"Captain, I need you to stay conscious." "Please, sir, stay with me." First Officer Marina Chen's voice, urgent and commanding, cut through the cockpit alarms. But Flight Engineer Daniels was slumped forward, unmoving, and Captain Reynolds only. Response was a weak groan as his hands slipped from the controls. Sweat beaded on his ashen face as the military transport aircraft began its subtle but deadly drift. The situation was deteriorating rapidly, and there wasn't another qualified pilot on board, or so everyone thought. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Rebecca Torres adjusted the air nozzle above an anxious young private's head and offered a reassuring smile. At 34, she had spent 12 years as a flight attendant on military transport flights, primarily serving as a cabin crew member for personnel deployments and VIP transfers. The C-17 Globemaster III was packed with 43 servicemen and women returning from a 6-month deployment in Kyrzakhstan, along with 3 high-ranking officers headed for strategic meetings at the Pentagon. The turbulence had been getting worse over the past hour as they navigated through an unexpected storm system over the North Atlantic. Rebecca had just finished securing loose items in the galley when she felt it, that subtle change in the aircraft's attitude that any experienced flight attendant could sense. Something was wrong. The plane's gentle banking motion didn't correct itself, and the nose was dropping almost imperceptibly. She made her way forward, bracing against the fuselage as the aircraft shuddered. The intercom remained silent. No reassuring message from the flight deck about routine turbulence or changed routing. That silence spoke volumes to Rebecca. Reaching the cockpit door, she knocked firmly, protocol dictating that she wait for a response before entering sacred pilot territory. No answer came. She knocked again, louder this time. "Flight deck, this is cabin crew Torres. Is everything all right?" The silence stretched for 10 more seconds before Rebecca made a decision that would alter the course of her life. She entered her emergency access code and pushed into the cockpit. The scene that greeted her was chaos contained within the small flight deck. Warning lights flashed across panels, altitude alerts pinged insistently, and the horizon line on the primary flight display was tilting dangerously. Captain Reynolds was barely conscious, his breathing labored and shallow. Flight Engineer Daniels was completely unresponsive, slumped against his harness. First Officer Chen was desperately trying to maintain control while simultaneously checking the captain's pulse. "What's happening?" Rebecca asked, her training kicking in. Assess the situation, maintain calm, take appropriate action. "Medical emergency," First Officer Chen replied through gritted teeth, her hands fighting the controls. "Food poisoning, I think. I'm not affected, but they both ate the same meal in the officer's mess before departure. Captain's getting worse. And Daniels is completely out. I need to declare an emergency and attempt an immediate diversion." Rebecca moved to check Daniels' pulse, thready but present. Captain Reynolds was now mumbling incoherently, his skin clammy and gray. "Where's the nearest suitable airport?" she asked, already reaching for the medical kit. "That's the problem," Chen replied, her voice tight with strain. "We're 300 miles off the coast of Greenland. Nearest diversion is Keflavik in Iceland, but this weather system is massive. I'm not sure we can." The aircraft suddenly dropped several hundred feet, causing Rebecca to slam against the ceiling before crashing back down. Chen struggled with the controls, her face a mask of concentration. "I need to focus on flying," Chen said, sweat beading on her forehead. "Can you radio for help? We need to get medical guidance and alert air traffic control about our situation." Rebecca nodded, reaching for the radio headset while administering an emergency anti-nausea injection to the captain from the medical kit. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency despite the fear clawing at her throat. She had participated in countless emergency drills, but this was horrifyingly real. Mayday, 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 she began, following protocol. This is Military Transport 237. We have a medical emergency on the flight deck. 2 pilots incapacitated. First officer is currently in control. Request immediate assistance and medical guidance. The crackling response from Reykjavik control came through broken and distorted by the storm. Military Transport 237, we copy your mayday. What is your current heading, altitude, and fuel status? Rebecca looked to Chen, who rattled off the information without taking her eyes from the instruments. Rebecca relayed it precisely. We have a doctor on standby, the controller responded. Please describe the symptoms of the incapacitated crew. As Rebecca detailed the symptoms, she noticed First Officer Chen's face draining of color. The woman's hands trembled slightly on the controls, and a sheen of sweat had appeared on her upper lip. First Officer, are you feeling all right? Rebecca asked, her stomach dropping. I'm fine, Chen insisted, but her voice wavered. Just the stress. I can handle this. Rebecca wasn't convinced. Did you have any of the same food as them? No, but Chen swallowed hard. I had coffee from the same pot. I thought I was fine, but I'm starting to feel not right. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The situation had just gone from dire to potentially catastrophic. If Chen became incapacitated as well, there would be no one to fly the massive military transport aircraft. Rebecca felt a momentary surge of panic before her training reasserted itself. Control, be advised our first officer may also be affected. Is there any possibility of deploying intercept aircraft to assist? Rebecca asked, her voice remarkably steady given the circumstances. Negative, Military Transport 237. The nearest. Assets are at least 90 minutes out. The storm system is preventing faster response. Can anyone else on board fly an aircraft? Rebecca's mind raced through the passenger manifest she had memorized earlier. There were 2 Air Force mechanics, but neither were pilots. The officers in the VIP section were intelligence and logistics specialists, not aviators. I'll check, she replied, though she already knew the answer. Stand by. She turned to Chen, who was now visibly struggling. I need to know everything. I need to do. You have to talk me through this. Chen looked at her in confusion. What do you mean? I think you're going to become incapacitated soon, Rebecca said with brutal honesty. And when that happens, someone needs to fly this plane. There are no pilots among the passengers. It has to be me. Chen's eyes widened with understanding and fear. You can't. It's impossible. This isn't a civilian airliner, it's a military transport with specialized systems. Then teach me, Rebecca said firmly. Now while you still can. First Officer Chen stared at her for a long moment, clearly weighing their limited options. The aircraft lurched again, and she made her decision. Get Master Sergeant Williams from the passenger compartment. He's a loadmaster, he'll understand some of the systems better than you will. And find out if there's a flight surgeon or anyone with advanced medical training on board. Rebecca nodded and hurried back to the passenger cabin. She kept her face composed, not wanting to trigger panic. Ladies and gentlemen, she announced with practiced calm, we're experiencing some challenges on the flight deck. I need Master Sergeant Williams and anyone with medical training to come forward immediately. A tall, broad-shouldered man in his 40s stood up, along with a young woman in uniform. I'm Williams, the man said. What's going on? Medical emergency on the flight deck, Rebecca replied quietly. And I need a doctor if we have one. The young woman stepped forward. Lieutenant Sarah Novak, ma'am. I'm a combat medic. Perfect. Both of you, come with me now. As they moved toward the cockpit, Williams grabbed Rebecca's arm. How bad is it? All 3 flight crew members are either down or going down, she replied honestly. and we're 300 miles from the nearest runway, in the middle of a storm system. His face paled. Who's flying the plane? Right now? First Officer Chen. In about 10 minutes? Rebecca met his eyes steadily. Probably me with your help. William's jaw clenched, but he nodded resolutely. I've observed plenty of landings from the jump seat. I know the systems, but I've never actually flown. That makes 2 of us. Rebecca replied as they entered the cockpit. The scene had deteriorated. Captain Reynolds was now completely unconscious, and Chen was fighting to keep her eyes open and hands steady. The combat medic immediately moved to assess the downed crew members while Williams took in the situation with a professional's eye. Military Transport 237, what's your status? The radio crackled with the controller's voice. Rebecca picked up the headset. Control, this is cabin crew Torres again. We found a loadmaster and a combat medic, but no additional pilots. First Officer Chen is deteriorating rapidly. There was a long pause before the controller responded. Understood, Mount 237. We're trying to locate any pilots in your vicinity, but the storm is complicating matters. In the meantime, we need to prepare for the possibility that non-pilots may need to operate the aircraft. That's already happening, Rebecca replied grimly. First Officer Chen is attempting to give us a crash course before she becomes completely incapacitated. Chen was indeed trying to explain the most critical systems, her words slurring slightly as she fought against the advancing symptoms. The autopilot is engaged, but it's fighting the turbulence. If it disconnects, you'll need to take manual control immediately. Williams took the jump seat, absorbing everything Chen said with intense concentration. The navigation system is set for Keflavik, Chen continued, but you'll need to monitor it. The storm might force course adjustments. Rebecca positioned herself behind Chen, watching every movement, every instrument, trying to absorb years of training in minutes. The enormity of what she might soon be required to do threatened to overwhelm her, but she pushed the fear aside. 48 lives depended on her focus right now. What about landing? Williams asked the question Rebecca wasn't ready to voice. Chen's eyes were drooping now, her words coming slower. You'll need to follow a TC instructions precisely. They can talk you through it. The most important thing is maintaining the correct approach speed and not over-controlling. Lieutenant Novak looked up from attending to Captain Reynolds. They're all suffering from severe food poisoning, possibly norovirus. I've given them anti-nausea medication and started IV fluids, but they're going to be out of commission for several hours at minimum. Rebecca exchanged a grim look with Williams. Several hours. The aircraft's fuel reserves would be critically low by then. Military Transport 237. The radio came to life again. We've located a C-17 instructor pilot who's going to advise you. Stand by for connection. A moment later, a new voice came through the headset. MT-237. This is Lieutenant Colonel James Mercer, 57th Airlift Squadron. I understand you have a situation. That's putting it mildly, Colonel, Rebecca replied, relief evident in her voice. Our entire flight crew is incapacitated. I'm a flight attendant with no pilot training, and I have a loadmaster assisting me. There was a brief pause. All right, Mount 237. First things first. What's your current altitude, heading, and fuel state? Rebecca relayed the information from the instrument panel. Good. Now I need you to take the first officer's seat. The autopilot should maintain your current flight path, but I need you familiar with the controls in case you need to take over manually. As Rebecca settled into the now vacant first officer's seat, Chen having been moved to the captain's chair where she could still observe, but was no longer handling controls, she felt the full weight of responsibility descend upon her. Her hands hovered over the control yoke, not yet touching it, but preparing for the moment when she would have to take command of the massive aircraft. "I'm here, Colonel," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Tell me what I need to know to bring everyone home safely." The minutes that followed were a blur of technical instructions, system explanations, and emergency procedures. "Lieutenant." Colonel Mercer walked her through the basic flight dynamics of the C-17, focusing on what she absolutely needed to know to maintain controlled flight. Williams proved invaluable, his knowledge of the aircraft systems filling in critical gaps. Together, they formed an impromptu flight crew born of necessity and desperation. "You're doing great," Mercer encouraged through the radio. "We've got a simulator crew setting up a parallel scenario to yours. They're going to test approaches to help guide you in." The aircraft shuddered violently as it pushed through another wall of turbulence. The autopilot warnings blared, and suddenly the system disengaged. The control yoke began to move on its own as the aircraft responded to the buffeting winds. "Autopilot's disengaged," Rebecca called out, her hands instinctively gripping the yoke as Mercer had instructed. "Take control," Mercer commanded calmly. "Gentle inputs only. Remember what I told you about small corrections." Rebecca's knuckles whitened as she fought against the instinct to over-control. The massive transport aircraft seemed to resist her. At first, then gradually began to respond. Williams monitored the engine output and flight systems, calling out parameters in a steady voice that helped anchor her. "That's it," Mercer encouraged. "You've got it. Now let's get the autopilot re-engaged." Following his instructions, Rebecca managed to stabilize the aircraft enough to re-engage the autopilot. She released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "Well done," Mercer said. "You've got good instincts." Rebecca didn't feel like she had good instincts at all. She felt terrified and overwhelmed. But beneath the fear was a growing determination. These people were her responsibility. They had families waiting for them, homes to return to, lives to live. And she was now their best hope of reaching those futures. "Colonel," she said, "I need to know honestly, what are our chances of landing safely?" There was a pause before. Mercer replied, "If the weather improves and we can get you to Keflavik, and if you continue to handle the aircraft as well as you just did, I'd say your chances are better than you might think." It wasn't exactly a ringing endorsement, but it was something to hold on to. Lieutenant Novak approached from where she'd been tending to the incapacitated crew. "Ma'am, I need to brief the passengers. They're getting restless, and there are rumors spreading." Rebecca nodded. "Tell them there's a medical situation with the flight crew and that we're diverting to Iceland. Don't mention that I'm flying unless absolutely necessary." As Novak left, Rebecca turned back to the controls, studying them with renewed intensity. She would not fail these people. She could not. The next 2 hours were a masterclass in crisis management. Rebecca absorbed everything Mercer taught her, practicing emergency procedures and gradually gaining confidence in handling the aircraft. Williams proved to be an excellent co-pilot, his technical knowledge complementing her growing feel for the aircraft's responses. The storm began to ease as they approached Icelandic airspace, a small mercy in an otherwise merciless situation. But the hardest part was yet to come, landing the massive military transport aircraft. "We're 20 minutes from Keflavik," Williams announced, checking the navigation systems. "Fuel state is getting critical." "MT-237, this is Keflavik approach," a new voice came over the radio. "We've cleared all traffic and have emergency services standing by. The weather has improved somewhat, but you'll still be dealing with crosswinds. On approach." Rebecca acknowledged the information, then turned to Williams. "I need to brief the passengers before we begin our approach. They deserve to know what's happening." He nodded grimly. "I'll monitor things here." Rebecca stepped into the passenger cabin, where an eerie quiet had settled. All eyes turned to her, faces etched with concern and fear. She took a deep breath and addressed them with all the confidence she could muster. "Ladies and gentlemen, as you've been informed, Our flight crew has been incapacitated due to a severe medical issue. We are approximately 20 minutes from landing at Keflavik Air Base in Iceland." She paused, knowing the next words would change everything. "I want to be completely honest with you. I will be landing this aircraft with guidance from a C-17 instructor pilot via radio and assistance from Master Sergeant Williams." A murmur ran through the cabin, faces paling with the realization of their situation. "I've been receiving intensive instruction for the past 3 hours," she continued, "and I want to assure you that I am committed to getting everyone on this aircraft safely on the ground. I need you all to prepare for what might be a rough landing. Secure your harnesses, brace yourselves according to proper procedure, and most importantly, have faith. We will get through this together." A young private raised her hand. "Ma'am, weren't you just serving us coffee a few hours ago?" Rebecca smiled slightly. "Yes, Private. And now I'm going to land this plane. Any other questions?" The atmosphere in the cabin shifted subtly. Fear remained, but now it was tempered with something else: respect, and perhaps a touch of hope. A grizzled sergeant spoke up from the back. "If a flight attendant can land this beast, the least we can do is make it easy for her. You heard the lady. Check your harnesses and prepare to brace." His commanding voice spurred everyone into action, the military discipline reasserting itself. Rebecca nodded gratefully to him before returning to the cockpit, her resolve strengthened by the trust these soldiers were placing in her. Back at the controls, she found Mercer and the Keflavik approach controller conferring about the best approach path given the conditions. "Rebecca," Mercer said, using her first name for the first time, "we're going to take this step by step. The simulator team has run through this scenario 12 times now, and they've identified the safest approach profile for someone with your level of experience." "I'm ready," she replied, settling into the seat and placing her hands on the controls. "First, we're going to begin our descent," Mercer instructed. "Reduce power to 65% and adjust pitch to maintain 250 knots." Following his guidance precisely, Rebecca began the aircraft's descent toward Iceland. Each instruction was clear, each maneuver executed with growing confidence. Williams called out altitudes and speeds, confirming that each parameter matched what Mercer expected. As they descended through 10,000 feet, the coastline of Iceland came into view, a rugged, beautiful sight that represented beginning approach phase. Extend flaps to position 2. The flap controls were handled carefully while maintaining the descent profile. "You're doing beautifully. Now we're going to configure for landing. Gear down." The distinctive thunk of the landing gear extending reverberated through the aircraft, followed by the confirmation lights on the panel. "Landing gear down and locked. Flaps to full. Reduce speed to approach reference. You'll feel the aircraft getting sluggish. That's normal." The controls became heavier as the aircraft slowed and the aerodynamics changed. The runway was now visible. Ahead, a concrete strip that seemed impossibly narrow from this height. "You're perfectly aligned. Maintain this glide path. Remember what we discussed about the flare maneuver before touchdown." The crosswind that had been forecasted made itself known, pushing against the massive aircraft. Compensation with rudder input was needed, fighting to keep the hulking transport aligned with the runway centerline, 1,000 feet. Sink rate: normal, 500 feet, 300 feet. The world narrowed to the runway ahead, the controls and the calm voice in the headset. 200 feet, looking good. 100 feet. Begin your flare now. Gradually pull back on the yoke. The yoke was pulled back gently, feeling the aircraft's nose rise slightly, bleeding off speed and preparing for contact with the ground. 50 feet. 30 feet. 20. 10. The massive tires of the transport touched down on the runway with a screech and a jolt that ran through the entire airframe. The aircraft bounced slightly, then settled onto the tarmac. Reverse thrust. The thrust reversers were deployed, feeling the powerful engines now working to slow the aircraft rather than propel it. The aircraft decelerated rapidly, the end of the runway approaching but now clearly achievable. Brakes, gentle pressure. The brakes were applied, feeling the massive transport slowing further until finally they were down to taxi speed. Military. Transport 237, welcome to Keflavik. Taxi to the end of the runway and hold position. Emergency vehicles will meet you there. As the aircraft was brought to a complete stop, the magnitude of what had just been accomplished hit all at once. Hands began to shake, the adrenaline that had sustained everyone for the past 4 hours finally ebbing away. A steady hand was placed on the shoulder. You did it. You actually did it. From the passenger cabin behind came the sound of cheering and applause as the realization spread that they were safely on the ground. Emotions threatened to overwhelm. That was one of the finest pieces of emergency flying I've ever witnessed. You're a natural. Laughter erupted, a sound of relief and disbelief mingled together. I think I'll stick to serving coffee for now. But as emergency vehicles surrounded the aircraft and medical personnel rushed aboard to tend to the incapacitated flight crew, nothing would ever be the same again. A capacity for courage and skill had been discovered that was never imagined possessing. The passengers are asking for you. I think they want to thank you personally. Standing at the entrance to the passenger cabin, there was sudden hesitation. Despite having just landed a massive military transport aircraft with no prior flight experience, the faces turned toward her were transformed. Gone were the anxious, fearful expressions from hours earlier. In their place were looks of profound respect, gratitude, and something even more uncomfortable, awe. A moment of silence hung in the air before the entire cabin erupted in thunderous applause. Military discipline momentarily forgotten, soldiers rose to their feet, cheering. The applause washed over like a physical force, cheeks flushing with a mixture of embarrassment and pride. You should say something. They need this moment as much as you do. The cabin quieted as a hand was raised. Thank you, but I didn't do this alone. This was essential to our success, as was the medical expertise. And without the guidance from the ground, this was a team effort in every sense. With all due respect, we watched you go from serving us coffee to taking the controls of this bird. Team effort or not, you're the one who put your hands on the stick when nobody else could. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the cabin. I just did what needed to be done. The same as any of you would have in my position. But it wasn't any of us, it was you. The simple truth of those words struck deeply. It had been her. When faced with a seemingly impossible situation, there was no freezing or panicking. The responsibility was accepted and somehow against. All odds succeeded. Medical teams are boarding now. Please remain seated until they've attended to the flight crew and anyone else requiring assistance. We'll be disembarking shortly. As if on cue, the aircraft door opened and emergency medical personnel rushed aboard, quickly moving to the cockpit where the incapacitated crew members waited. You did well. Their conditions are stable. They will recover. Relief flooded through. Throughout the crisis, a part of the mind had been constantly worried about the crew. To know they would recover was perhaps the best news of all. Within 30 minutes, the passengers were disembarking onto the wind-swept tarmac. Standing at the exit, fulfilling the usual role of seeing passengers off, though nothing else about. This situation resembled normal operations. Each service member paused to thank personally, many offering handshakes or salutes that left emotions overwhelmed. On behalf of the United States Air Force, I want to express our profound gratitude for your extraordinary actions today. Was just doing your job? Somehow I doubt emergency pilot was in your job description. No, it definitely wasn't. We've arranged accommodations for you and all passengers. The flight crew has been transported to our medical facilities and are receiving treatment. They're expected to make a full recovery within 48 hours. But first, There are some people very interested in speaking with you." In the conference room waited several officers, including a tall, distinguished man who immediately stood. "It's an honor to meet you in person, though I feel like we've already been through quite a lot together. You guided me through the impossible. I don't know how to thank you. You executed the landing perfectly. That's thanks enough." The debriefing that followed was thorough, but not intimidating. Every detail was recounted from the moment something first seemed wrong to the final touchdown. On the runway, the officers asked clarifying questions, but never challenged the decisions or actions. What I find most remarkable is your ability to absorb and implement complex flight procedures under extreme pressure with no prior training. I've observed pilots for 12 years. You pick things up. Observation is one thing. Actually flying, a transport to a successful emergency landing, is quite another. Have you ever considered becoming a pilot? The question hung in the air, opening possibilities that had never been imagined before this extraordinary day. "Ms. Torres?" The question caught her completely off guard. "Sir, you've demonstrated aptitude that can't be taught," he continued. "Natural instinct, grace under pressure, spatial awareness, quick learning. These are qualities we look for in our aviators." Rebecca blinked rapidly, struggling to process the suggestion. "I'm 34, sir. Isn't that too old to start flight training?" "Normally, perhaps," the general conceded. "But these are hardly normal circumstances. We're not making any formal offers right now," Colonel Harrington clarified, seeing her overwhelmed expression. "But doors that were closed before might now be open. Something to consider." The meeting concluded shortly after, with promises of further conversations once everyone had rested. Rebecca was escorted to officers' quarters, where a room had been prepared for her. After a quick shower, she collapsed onto the bed, physically and emotionally exhausted. Sleep came instantly, but brought with it vivid dreams. The cockpit alarms blaring, the controls fighting against her hands, the runway rushing up to meet them. She jerked awake in the early hours of the morning, heart pounding, sheets tangled around her legs. For a long moment, she sat in the darkness, letting reality reassert itself. They had made it. Everyone had survived. But the weight of those hours in the cockpit lingered, a profound experience that had altered something fundamental within her. Rebecca rose and moved to the window, looking out at the pre-dawn airfield. A C-17 sat silhouetted against the brightening eastern sky, not their aircraft, but identical to it. She studied its massive form, seeing it with new eyes. Not just as the vehicle she worked in, but as a complex machine she had controlled, had communed with in some primal way. A knock at her door pulled her from her thoughts. Lieutenant Novak stood in the hallway, looking fresh despite the early hour. "Sorry to disturb you," the combat medic said, "but I thought you'd want to know Captain Reynolds is awake and asking for you." 30 minutes later, Rebecca entered the base medical facility. Captain Reynolds was propped up in bed, still pale, but alert. First Officer Chen occupied the adjacent bed, while Flight Engineer Daniels was sitting up in a chair, looking somewhat recovered, but weak. "There she is," Reynolds said, his voice raspy but warm. "The flight attendant who became a pilot." Rebecca felt a flush of embarrassment. "Hardly a pilot, sir. Just someone who followed instructions very carefully." "That's not what I heard," Chen interjected. "Colonel Mercer said you handled that crosswind approach like you'd been flying for years." "How much do you remember?" Rebecca asked, changing the subject. "Bits and pieces," Reynolds admitted. "I remember feeling suddenly ill, trying to stay conscious. I vaguely recall you entering the cockpit." He shook his head. "The next clear memory is waking up here." "We've reviewed the cockpit voice recordings," Daniels added. "You remained remarkably calm throughout the entire ordeal." Rebecca shrugged slightly. "Panic wouldn't have helped anyone." "True," Reynolds agreed, "but most people would have panicked anyway. You didn't." He extended his hand. Thank you for saving our lives and everyone else on that aircraft." The sincerity in his eyes made it impossible for Rebecca to deflect. The gratitude this time. She took his hand and nodded, accepting the thanks for what it was, recognition of an extraordinary act performed under the most extreme circumstances. After leaving the medical facility, Rebecca wandered the base, eventually finding herself at the edge of the runway where their C-17 still sat. A maintenance crew was performing checks, preparing it for eventual departure once a recovery flight. Crew arrived. Quite a bird, isn't she? Rebecca turned to find Master Sergeant Williams approaching, hands in his pockets against the Icelandic chill. "Yes," she agreed, gazing at the massive aircraft. "I never really appreciated just how much." So until yesterday. They stood in companionable silence for a moment, both contemplating the machine that had been the setting for their shared ordeal. "The general wasn't just making conversation, you know," William said finally. "About you becoming a pilot." Rebecca sighed. "I'm a flight attendant, Sergeant. That's what I trained for, what I've done for 12 years. And yesterday you were an emergency pilot," he countered. "Circumstances change. People change with them." He turned to face her directly. "Sometimes we're more than we think we are, until life forces us to discover our true capabilities." His words struck a chord deep within her. Before yesterday, Rebecca had seen herself in clearly defined terms: competent, professional, but ultimately just support personnel. The events in that cockpit had shattered those self-imposed limitations. "They're holding a ceremony tomorrow," Williams continued. "The base commander wants to recognize what you did officially." Rebecca groaned. "That's really not necessary." Williams laughed. "Necessary or not, it's happening. Military loves its ceremonies." He glanced at her with newfound respect. "You might want to prepare a few words." That evening, Rebecca received a call from Air Mobility Command Headquarters. The story of her emergency landing had reached the highest levels of the Air Force, and there was considerable interest in her future plans. Would she be willing to meet with recruitment specialists? Would she consider specialized flight training? The possibilities being presented were dizzying. "I need time to think," she told the officer on the phone. "This is a lot to process." "Of course," came the understanding reply. "But don't take too long. Some opportunities don't come around." Twice, after hanging up, Rebecca sat on her bed, thoughts swirling. Her entire adult life had been built around her identity as a flight attendant. She was good at it, took pride in it. To suddenly change course at 34 seemed foolhardy, yet the experience in that cockpit had awakened something she couldn't ignore, a capability she hadn't known existed, and a surprising hunger to explore it further. A text message chimed on her phone. Her sister Elena, back in Albuquerque, saw the news. "My little sister landed a military plane? Call me immediately." Rebecca smiled, realizing word was spreading beyond military channels. She called Elena, who answered on the first ring. "Rebecca Maria Torres, you're all over the news. Flight attendant heroically lands military transport after crew falls ill. What happened?" For the next half hour, Rebecca recounted the experience to her astonished sister, finding that putting it into words for a loved one made it seem both more real and more surreal simultaneously. "So what happens now?" Elena asked when the story was complete. "I don't know," Rebecca admitted. "They're talking about flight training, possibly a commission. It's crazy, is it?" Elena challenged. "You've always been the most capable person." "I know. Remember when Dad's car broke down in the middle of nowhere, and you were the one who figured out how to fix it? Or when Abuela got sick and you coordinated everything with the doctors? You've always risen to challenges. This is just a bigger one." Rebecca smiled at her sister's unwavering faith. "This is a little different than fixing Dad's carburetor. Scale is different. The essence is the same. You see what needs to be done and you do it, no matter how impossible it seems." After ending the call, Rebecca opened her laptop and searched for news coverage of the incident. It was indeed spreading rapidly. Extraordinary act of heroism. Flight attendant lands military aircraft. Air Force considers special commission for heroic. Civilian. From serving coffee to saving lives. The Rebecca Torres story. The coverage was overwhelming, but what caught her attention were the comments beneath the article's messages from pilots, flight attendants, and ordinary people expressing amazement and admiration. Several female pilots had specifically commented about the inspirational nature of her actions, how it would encourage more women to consider aviation careers. That thought lingered as Rebecca finally drifted off to sleep, the idea that her actions might inspire others, might show what was possible when circumstances demanded the extraordinary. The ceremony the next day was mercifully brief but powerfully moving. The base commander presented Rebecca with the Civilian Award for Valor, the highest honor the Air Force could bestow upon a civilian. Master Sergeant Williams received recognition for his critical assistance, as did Lieutenant Novak for her medical intervention. As Williams had warned, Rebecca was called upon to speak. Looking out at the assembled personnel, pilots, mechanics, medical staff, and the passengers from Mount 237, she found unexpected clarity. "Yesterday, I was faced with an impossible choice," she began. "I could either attempt something far beyond my training and experience, or I could accept the unacceptable, the likely loss of 48 lives. In that moment, the choice became simple, even as the task remained daunting." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "What I learned through that experience is that our limitations are often self-imposed. We define ourselves by our titles, our training, our past experiences. Flight attendant, loadmaster, combat medic. These roles matter, they reflect specialized skills and knowledge, but they don't define the boundaries of our capabilities." Her gaze swept across the audience, connecting with individual faces. In crisis, those boundaries fall away. We become simply human beings facing challenges, drawing on reserves of courage and ability we may not have known we possessed. "Yesterday taught me that we are all capable of extraordinary acts when circumstances demand them." She looked directly at the young private, who had asked if she was the same person who had served coffee hours before landing the plane. "Yes. I was just a flight attendant on a military transport. And yes, I landed that transport with no pilot at the controls." Both statements are true. Both are part of who I am. The difference is that now I understand that just doesn't belong in either sentence. The applause that followed was deafening. As Rebecca stepped back from the podium, she caught Lieutenant Colonel Mercer's eye. He nodded once, a gesture of profound respect between equals. The remainder of their stay in Iceland passed quickly. A recovery flight crew arrived to inspect the C-17 and fly it, along with the original passengers, to their intended destination. Captain Reynolds and his crew were cleared to return to duty within the week. On her final evening at Keflavik, Rebecca received a visitor, Brigadier General Wallace, who had flown in specifically to meet her. "Ms. Torres," he said without preamble, "I've reviewed every aspect of the incident, including the cockpit voice recordings and flight data. What you accomplished was nothing short of remarkable." Rebecca nodded, accepting the compliment without deflection this time. "I've also spoken with Air Mobility Command and the Secretary of the Air Force," Wallace continued. "We'd like to offer you a direct commission and accelerated flight training. It would be unconventional, but so are you." He handed her a folder containing detailed information about the proposed program, a specially designed training curriculum that would leverage her existing knowledge while rapidly developing her piloting skills. "This isn't a publicity stunt," the general assured her, seeing her skepticism. "You've demonstrated aptitude that can't be taught. We'd be foolish not to develop it." "And if I prefer to remain a flight attendant?" Rebecca asked, genuinely curious about his response. Then you'll continue being an exceptional flight attendant." With an extraordinary story, Wallace replied without hesitation. "This isn't an ultimatum. It's an opportunity, should you wish to seize it." After he left, Rebecca opened the folder and read through the materials carefully. The proposed training would be intense, condensing years of traditional instruction into months. It would be challenging, demanding, transformative. She closed the folder and moved to the window, looking out at the airfield where aircraft were taking off and landing in the gathering dusk. 24 hours ago, such a proposal would have seemed absurd. Now, it felt like a door opening to a future she hadn't known to imagine. Her phone chimed with a message from Master Sergeant Williams. "Whatever you decide, you've already proven yourself. The rest is just details," Rebecca smiled. He was right. The most important test had already been passed in that cockpit over the North Atlantic. Everything that followed, ceremonies, commendations, offers of commissions, was secondary to that essential truth. When faced with the impossible, she had risen to meet it. The next morning, as she prepared to board the transport back to the United States, Rebecca found herself at a literal and metaphorical crossroads. To her right lay the passenger cabin, the familiar environment where she had worked for 12 years. To her left, the cockpit, a space that had once been foreign territory but now held new meaning. Lieutenant Colonel Mercer approached as she hesitated at the junction. "Having second thoughts already?" he asked with a knowing smile. Rebecca laughed softly. "More like 40th thoughts." "It's a big change." "The biggest changes often come when we least expect them," Mercer observed. "Sometimes life's most important doors appear when we're not looking for them." Rebecca nodded, considering his words. "And if I walk through this particular door, what then?" "Then you begin a new chapter," he replied simply. "One where you're not just responding to emergencies, but preventing them. Where your unique perspective makes the entire system safer and more effective." He gestured toward the cockpit. "Want to observe the pre-flight checks? Might help with your decision." Rebecca followed him into the cockpit, taking the jump seat behind the pilots. As they moved through their procedures, she found herself anticipating each step, understanding the purpose behind each action in a way she never had before. Her experience in that crisis had transformed her relationship to this environment permanently. Watching the confident, practiced movements of the pilots, Rebecca felt something settle within her, a certainty that had been building since those first terrifying moments when she'd taken control of Mount 237. She had discovered capabilities within herself that couldn't be ignored or forgotten. The only question that remained was what she would do with that knowledge returned to her familiar role, forever changed by the experience, or step into an entirely new future shaped by it. As the engine spooled up and the massive aircraft began to move, Rebecca Torres made her decision. 6 months later, Rebecca Torres stood at the edge of the tarmac at Randolph Air Force Base, squinting against the Texas sun. The weight of the flight suit still felt strange against her shoulders, the material stiffer than the familiar fabric of her flight attendant uniform. Her hand moved unconsciously to the silver wings pinned above her left breast, pocket pilot wings, earned through what instructors had dubbed the most intensive specialized flight training program in Air Force history. "Nervous?" asked Major Sophia Reyes, Rebecca's primary flight instructor and now her commanding officer in the newly formed Special Aviation Response Team. "Terrified," Rebecca admitted with a small smile. "But that seems appropriate." Today marked her first official flight as pilot in command of a C-17 Globemaster III, the same type of aircraft she had landed in that North Atlantic emergency. What made today different was that this time it was planned, intentional, the culmination of 6 months of grueling training that had pushed her to physical and mental limits she hadn't known existed. "You've earned this," Reyes said firmly, reading the doubt in Rebecca's expression. "Your simulator scores are exceptional. Your emergency procedure execution is textbook, and your instincts." She shook her head in admiration. "Well, we already know about your instincts." Rebecca nodded, accepting the encouragement without deflection, another skill she'd developed over these transformative months. The Rebecca Torres who had served coffee and demonstrated safety procedures would have minimized the compliment, deflected the praise. The Captain Torres who stood on this tarmac today understood the importance of acknowledging her capabilities. "The crew is waiting," Rhea said, checking her watch. "Your passengers arrive in 30 minutes. The passengers." That was another layer of significance to today's flight. Rebecca would be piloting a transport carrying 38 Air Force Academy cadets, future pilots who had specifically requested to fly with the flight attendant who became a pilot. Their instructor had reached out to Rebecca's command, explaining that her story had become a case study in leadership and crisis management at the academy. "Try not to crash this one," Reyes added with a wink. "The paperwork would be a nightmare." Rebecca laughed, grateful for the moment of levity. "I'll do my best, Major." As she walked toward the massive aircraft waiting on the tarmac, Rebecca's mind drifted back to the day she had made her decision seated in that jump seat, watching the recovery crew pilots perform their pre-flight checks, feeling the certainty settle into her bones. She had turned to Lieutenant Colonel Mercer beside her and simply said, "I want to fly." What had followed was unprecedented in Air Force history. A direct commission to captain for a civilian with no prior military service, based solely on demonstrated extraordinary aptitude. A training program custom designed to build on her existing knowledge of aircraft operations while rapidly developing her piloting skills. The announcement had generated controversy in some quarters. Traditionalists within the Air Force questioned whether such an unconventional path undermined established training protocols. Internet commenters debated whether her emergency landing had been skill or merely luck, whether the program was genuine merit recognition or a publicity stunt. Rebecca had ignored it all, focusing solely on the demands of each day's training. And those demands had been immense. 14-hour days divided between simulator time, classroom instruction, and physical conditioning. Cramming years of aeronautical knowledge into months. Learning not just to fly, but to command, to make decisions that affected everyone aboard her aircraft. There had been moments of doubt, nights when exhaustion made her question her decision. A particularly grueling simulator session involving multiple cascading failures had left her shaking and uncertain. "You're being too hard on yourself," her instructor had said afterward. "No one expects perfection." "I do," Rebecca had replied simply. That expectation not of flawlessness, but of excellence, had driven her through the program at a pace that astonished her instructors. What they came to understand, and what Rebecca herself gradually recognized, was that her 12 years as a flight attendant had prepared her in ways no one had anticipated. She already knew aircraft systems from a practical perspective. She understood crew resource management intimately, having observed hundreds of flight crews working together. She had developed a sixth sense for aircraft behavior through thousands of hours in flight. These advantages, combined with her natural aptitude and unrelenting determination, had transformed her from novice to expert pilot in a time frame that defied conventional wisdom. Now, approaching her aircraft for her first official flight as aircraft commander, Rebecca felt the weight of those 6 months, the knowledge gained, the skills honed, the confidence earned through countless hours of practice and study. Her flight crew waited at the base of the air stairs: co-pilot, flight engineer, and loadmaster, all experienced Air Force personnel who had been briefed on her background. She had worried about their reaction to serving under a former flight attendant, but their professionalism had quickly dispelled those concerns. Captain Torres, her co-pilot, Lieutenant Ryan Mitchell, greeted her with a respectful nod. "Pre-flight checks are complete. Aircraft is in optimal condition." "Thank you, Lieutenant," Rebecca replied, climbing the stairs with practiced ease. Let's run through the flight plan one more time before our passengers arrive. In the cockpit, now Rebecca settled into the left seat, the captain's position. Her hands moved over the controls with familiar confidence, no longer the hesitant touches of that emergency flight over the North Atlantic. Each switch, each display, each procedure was now as natural to her as breathing. The pre-flight briefing was thorough and efficient. Their flight plan would take them from Randolph to the Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs, a route chosen specifically for its educational value, crossing diverse terrain and weather conditions that would provide teaching moments for the cadets on board. As Rebecca completed her final checks, the radio crackled to life. "Globemaster 379, this is Randolph Tower. Your VIP has arrived and requests permission to board before the cadet group." Rebecca exchanged a puzzled glance with Lieutenant Mitchell. "VIP? There's no VIP listed on our manifest." "Acknowledge the tower," she instructed while reaching for the manifest tablet. "I'll check with base operations." Before she could make the call, the cockpit door opened, and Major Reyes appeared with a distinguished visitor, Brigadier General Wallace, the officer who had originally offered Rebecca the direct commission. "Captain Torres," the general said with a warm smile. "Hope you don't mind an addition to your passenger list. I wanted to observe this historic flight personally." Rebecca stood and saluted crisply. "Not at all, sir. We're honored to have you aboard." "At ease, Captain," Wallace said, returning the salute. "I won't interfere with your operation. Just pretend I'm not here." His eyes twinkled. "Though I would appreciate a brief word before we depart." Rebecca nodded to her co-pilot to continue preparations while she stepped aside with the general. "6 months ago," Wallace said quietly, "I made you an offer based on potential I saw in your actions over the North Atlantic. Today, I'm pleased to say that my assessment was, if anything, too conservative." Rebecca felt a flush of pride at his words. "Your instructors report that you've exceeded every benchmark we established," he continued. "Major Reyes tells me you're already performing at the level of pilots with years of experience." "I've had excellent teachers, sir. Indeed. But there's something that can't be taught, an intuitive understanding of flight dynamics, an instinctive grasp of aircraft behavior. You either have it or you don't." He gestured toward the cockpit. "You have it in abundance." Rebecca accepted the compliment with a nod. "Thank you, sir." "There's more," Wallace said, his expression growing more serious. "The Special Aviation Response Team program is being expanded. Your success has opened doors for others with unconventional backgrounds, but exceptional aptitude." He handed her a folder. "After this tour concludes, we'd like you to serve as training officer for the next cohort." Rebecca's eyes widened slightly as she accepted the folder. "Sir, I've only just completed my own training." "Precisely why you're the ideal candidate," Wallace replied. "You understand the journey these candidates will undertake in a way no traditional instructor could. Your experience bridges both worlds." Before Rebecca could respond, Lieutenant Mitchell approached. "Captain, the cadets have arrived. We're cleared for boarding." Rebecca nodded. "Thank you, Lieutenant. Begin passenger boarding. I'll join you momentarily." As Mitchell departed, Wallace gave her a knowing smile. "Consider the assignment, Captain. We'll discuss it further in Colorado Springs." He gestured toward the cabin. "For now, you have a flight to command." The next 30 minutes were a flurry of activity, greeting the Academy cadets, conducting the pre-departure briefing, receiving final clearance from the tower. Through it all, Rebecca maintained a calm, focused demeanor that belied the emotional significance of the moment. Finally seated in the captain's position, running through the last items on the pre-takeoff checklist, Rebecca felt a profound sense of rightness. This was where she belonged, not because of that one emergency landing 6 months ago, but because of everything she had done since to earn this position. Randolph Tower, Globemaster 379 ready for departure, she announced into her headset. Globemaster 379, you are cleared for takeoff. Wings 270 at 8 knots. Rebecca acknowledged the clearance, then turned to her co-pilot. Let's fly. The massive C-17 accelerated down the runway, gathering speed until Rebecca pulled back on the yoke, feeling the familiar sensation of the aircraft lifting into the air. The moment was both ordinary, she had performed dozens of takeoffs during training, and extraordinary in its significance. This was her first official flight as aircraft commander, the culmination of a journey that had begun in crisis and continued through sheer determination. Once they reached cruising altitude, Rebecca activated the cabin intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Torres. We've reached our cruising altitude of 30,000 feet and are on course for the Air Force Academy. Weather conditions at our destination are favorable, with clear skies and light winds. Estimated arrival time is 14:30 hours. She paused, considering her next words carefully. For our Academy cadets, I understand my story has become something of a case study in your leadership curriculum. I want you to know that while the emergency landing over the North Atlantic was a defining moment, it was only the beginning of the story. The real work came afterward, the months of training, the countless hours in simulators, the academic challenges. She looked out at the vast blue sky stretching before them, feeling a sense of profound gratitude for the path that had brought her here. The lesson I hope you take from my journey isn't about one dramatic moment. It's about what happens after the dedication required to transform an emergency response into a genuine expertise. Being in the right place at the right time might be luck. Being ready for that moment is preparation. And what you do with the opportunity afterward is character. Rebecca completed her address, unaware that General Wallace was smiling broadly in the passenger cabin, or that Major Reyes had quietly recorded her impromptu speech for inclusion in future training materials. The flight to Colorado Springs proceeded smoothly, the C-17 performing flawlessly under Rebecca's command. As they began their approach to the Academy airfield, Lieutenant Mitchell glanced over at his captain. "Permission to speak freely, ma'am." Rebecca nodded, her attention still primarily on the approach procedures. "Go ahead, Lieutenant." "I was skeptical when I heard about this assignment," he admitted. "Flying with the flight attendant pilot, I thought it was a publicity stunt." He shook his head. "I was wrong. You're one of the most natural aviators I've ever observed." Rebecca smiled slightly. "Thank you, Lieutenant. I appreciate your honesty. It's not just your flying skills," he continued. "It's your perspective. The way you anticipate passenger needs, your attention to cabin conditions, your awareness of how turbulence affects those in the back. Most pilots never develop that level of insight." His observation struck Rebecca deeply. She had been so focused on proving herself as a pilot that she hadn't fully recognized how her flight attendant background enhanced rather than detracted from her capabilities. That perspective comes from 12 years walking the aisles instead of sitting in this seat, she replied. Every experience teaches us something valuable if we're paying attention. The approach to the Academy airfield demanded her full concentration as they descended through swirling mountain winds. Rebecca handled the controls with confident precision, making micro-adjustments that kept the massive aircraft steady despite the challenging conditions. The landing was perfect, smooth, centered, with a touchdown so gentle that several passengers later commented they barely felt the transition from air to ground. As they taxied to the designated area, Rebecca felt a quiet pride in the execution. After completing shutdown procedures, Rebecca emerged from the cockpit to find General Wallace waiting with the Academy's Commandant of Cadets. "Exemplary flight, Captain Torres," the General said. "The Commandant would like a word." Colonel Jameson, the Academy's Commandant, stepped forward. "Captain Torres, your story has had a remarkable impact on our cadet training program. Your journey exemplifies our core values of integrity, service, and excellence in ways that theoretical case studies never could. Rebecca acknowledged the compliment with a respectful nod. "Thank you, sir. We'd like to invite you to address our entire cadet wing while you're here," Jameson continued. "Your perspective on crisis leadership and professional transformation would be invaluable to our future officers." The request surprised Rebecca. Public speaking had never been part of her career aspirations, yet she recognized the opportunity to shape young officers' understanding of leadership and adaptability. "I'd be honored, sir," she replied, "though I'm still processing the lessons myself. Sometimes the most valuable insights come from those still navigating the journey," Jameson observed. "Your perspective is uniquely relevant to these cadets, many of whom are struggling with their own questions of capability and belonging." The next morning, Rebecca stood before the assembled cadet wing, over 4,000 future Air Force officers in their blue uniforms, their faces upturned with expectation. The vast auditorium was silent as she approached the podium, the weight of their attention both intimidating and energizing. She had prepared remarks, carefully crafted to highlight the leadership principles and crisis management techniques that had guided her actions. But as she looked out at those young faces, some eager, some skeptical, all searching for wisdom that might serve them in future challenges, she set her notes aside. "6 months and 2 weeks ago," she began, her voice clear and steady, "I was serving coffee at 35,000 feet. I had been a flight attendant for 12 years, and I was good at my job. I took pride in it. I understood my role in the complex ecosystem of military aviation, and I performed it to the best of my ability." She paused, letting the contrast between that past and her present sink in. "I never aspired to be a pilot, never dreamed of wearing these wings. My ambitions were focused on excelling within the parameters I understood to be mine." Rebecca glanced down at her uniform, still new enough that sometimes she caught her reflection and felt a moment of surprise. Then came a crisis that defied those parameters. 3 incapacitated pilots. A plane full of service members counting on someone to bring them home safely. And no one else to do it but me. She stepped away from the podium, preferring to address them directly rather than from behind a barrier. "You've heard the story. You've studied the technical aspects of how an untrained civilian managed to land a military transport aircraft. But what I want to share with you today isn't about the mechanics of flight or emergency procedures. It's about something more fundamental. The artificial limitations we place on ourselves, and what happens when circumstances force us to shatter those limitations." Rebecca moved to the edge of the stage, closing the distance between herself and the cadets. "I didn't know I could fly a plane until I had to fly a plane. I didn't know I had the capacity to absorb complex technical instructions under extreme pressure until lives depended on it. I didn't know I possessed the mental fortitude to command an aircraft in crisis until there was no alternative." She let her gaze travel across the assembled cadets, making eye contact with as many as possible. "Each of you will face moments in your career when circumstances demand more than you believe yourself capable of giving. The question isn't whether those moments will come, they will. The question is how you'll respond when they do." Rebecca shared specific insights from her experience: the importance of focused calm under pressure, the critical nature of clear communication, the value of trusting one's instincts while remaining open to guidance. But she emphasized one point: above all others, the most dangerous limitations are the ones we place on ourselves. The boundaries we draw around our capabilities, often without evidence or testing. "I'm not a leader. I'm not technically inclined. I'm not brave enough." These self-imposed restrictions can be more crippling than any external obstacle. She gestured to her captain's bars and pilot wings. "I stand before you today not because I was born to be a pilot, but because crisis revealed capabilities I didn't know I possessed, and determination allowed me to develop those capabilities into expertise." Rebecca concluded her address by challenging each cadet to examine their own self-imposed limitations. to question the boundaries they had drawn around their potential. The Air Force doesn't need officers who can only function within comfortable parameters. It needs leaders who can step beyond those parameters when duty demands it, who can discover and develop capabilities they never knew they had, who can inspire others to do the same. The standing ovation that followed her speech lasted nearly 5 minutes, a response that both honored and humbled Rebecca. As she left the stage, General Wallace met her with evident approval. "That wasn't just a speech, Captain Torres," he sighed quietly. "That was a mission statement for the program we're building. The capacity to recognize and develop unexpected talent is critical to our future readiness." Later that evening, at a reception hosted by the Academy's leadership, Rebecca found herself approached by a cadet, young, serious, with eyes that reminded her of her own reflection during those intensive training months. "Captain Torres," the cadet said, "your speech today, it changed something for me." Rebecca nodded encouragingly. "How so, Cadet?" "Chen, ma'am, Melissa Chen." The young woman straightened slightly. "I've been struggling with aerodynamics. My academic advisor suggested I consider a non-pilot track because of my difficulties. I was ready to give up. And now?" Rebecca prompted gently. "Now I understand that struggling doesn't mean I'm not capable. It means I haven't yet discovered how to access that capability." Cadet Chun's expression firmed with resolve. "I'm going to request additional tutoring instead of changing tracks." Rebecca felt a profound satisfaction at the cadet's words, more meaningful than any official recognition or commendation. "The struggle is where growth happens, Cadet Chen," she said. "Remember that when the challenges seem overwhelming." As the reception concluded and Rebecca prepared to return to her quarters, Major Reyes approached with news that would add yet another dimension to Rebecca's evolving role. "Captain, we've received a request from Air Mobility Command," Reyes said. "They're developing new crew resource management protocols based on your experience. They'd like you to consult on the project, bringing both your flight attendant perspective and your new pilot expertise." Rebecca considered the request thoughtfully. "Bridging those worlds. That's exactly what General Wallace mentioned for the training program." Reyes nodded. "Your unique journey has created opportunities to rethink how we approach aviation, training and crew integration. The barriers between cabin crew and flight deck have always been more rigid than necessary. Your experience demonstrates the value of a more integrated approach." As Rebecca prepared for bed that night, she reflected on the day's events and the continuing evolution of her unexpected career path. What had begun as a crisis response had transformed into something far more significant, not just a personal journey from flight attendant to pilot, but potentially a catalyst for systemic change in military aviation training and crew integration. The folder General Wallace had given her remained on the nightstand, unopened. The proposed role as training officer for the next SART cohort represented yet another expansion of her responsibilities and influence. 6 months ago, such rapid advancement would have seemed impossible. Rebecca opened the folder, reviewing the details of the program. Candidates would be drawn from various backgrounds, not just flight attendants, but maintenance personnel, air traffic controllers, even intelligence specialists with demonstrated aptitude. Each would bring unique perspectives and experiences to their training, just as Rebecca had. Her role would be to help them bridge the gap between their existing knowledge and the demands of piloting, to guide them through the same transformative journey she had experienced. As she closed the folder, Rebecca found herself smiling at the thought of the challenges ahead. The path from serving coffee to commanding aircraft had been extraordinary, but in many ways, the most meaningful part of her journey was just beginning. 2 years later, Rebecca Torres stood at the window of her office at Andrews Air Force Base, watching a formation of C-17s returning from a training mission. The aircraft moved with choreographed precision against the clear autumn sky, their massive forms belying the grace with which they maneuvered. Captain Torres, her assistant, Technical Sergeant Miguel Ramirez, appeared at the door. "They're ready for you in the briefing room." Rebecca nodded, gathering the tablet containing her presentation materials. "Thank you, Sergeant." "Is General Wallace here yet?" "Just arrived, ma'am, along with the congressional delegation." The slight tension in Ramirez's voice made Rebecca smile. Today's briefing wasn't just for Air Force leadership, it was for members of the House Armed Services Committee who were evaluating the Special Aviation Response Team program for potential expansion and increased funding. "Don't worry, Miguel," she said, straightening her uniform jacket. "We've got the results to back up our program." The numbers speak for themselves, and they did. In the 2 years since its inception, SART had identified and trained 27 pilots from non-traditional backgrounds, all of whom were now serving with distinction in various Air Force commands. The program had expanded beyond its original concept to become a pathway for recognizing and developing exceptional talent throughout the service. Rebecca herself had risen to become SART's Director of Training, responsible for curriculum development and candidate assessment. Her dual background as both flight attendant and pilot continued to inform her approach, creating training protocols that drew on candidates' existing knowledge while rapidly building new skills. The delegation includes Senator Harris, Ramirez added as they walked toward the briefing room. "She's been vocal about her skepticism regarding the program's cost-effectiveness." Rebecca nodded, unsurprised. Senator Miranda Harris had built her reputation as a fiscal hawk, particularly when it came to military spending. Her questions would be pointed, her scrutiny intense. But Rebecca welcomed the challenge. She believed in SART's mission and impact with every fiber of her being. Entering the briefing room, Rebecca was struck by the assembled authority, General Wallace and his staff, 3 members of Congress and their aides, representatives from the Secretary of the Air Force's office, and most significantly, 5 of SSRT's graduates, now serving as pilots throughout the Air Force. "Captain Torres," General Wallace greeted her with a professional nod. "We're ready to begin when you are." Rebecca took her position at the front of the room, surveying the audience with calm confidence. 2 years earlier, such a high-profile presentation would have terrified her. Now it was simply part of her expanding role. "Good morning," she began. "Thank you for taking the time to learn about the Special Aviation Response Team program and its impact on Air Force capabilities and readiness." She activated the first slide of her presentation, a photograph of herself in her flight attendant uniform, taken just days before the emergency that had changed her life. SART began with a question: what potential talent are we missing by limiting our pilot recruitment and training to traditional pathways? My own journey from flight attendant to pilot was initially viewed as an anomaly, a unique response to an unprecedented emergency. But what if it wasn't an anomaly? What if there are individuals throughout our service with untapped aptitude for aviation leadership? Rebecca advanced to the next slide, showing data from the program's first 2 years. The results have been revelatory. Our 27 graduates have demonstrated performance metrics that equal or exceed their traditionally trained counterparts in several key areas. She detailed the specifics: exceptional scores in emergency management, above average, situational awareness, superior crew resource management, and innovative problem-solving in crisis situations. SART pilots bring diverse perspectives that enhance our capabilities, Rebecca continued. Former maintenance personnel understand aircraft systems at a fundamental level. Former air traffic controllers possess exceptional spatial awareness and communication skills. And yes, former flight attendants have unparalleled experience in cabin management, passenger psychology, and real-time problem solving. Senator Harris leaned forward, her expression skeptical. "Captain Torres, these results are impressive on paper. But how do you respond to concerns that your program essentially creates a shortcut into the cockpit? Traditional pilot training exists for a reason. Rebecca met the senator's gaze directly. With respect, Senator, SART is not a shortcut. It's an alternative path that recognizes different forms of aptitude and experience. Our candidates undergo rigorous screening that identifies specific cognitive and operational capabilities. The training itself is, if anything, more demanding than traditional pathways, condensing years of instruction into months of intensive development. She advanced to a slide showing comparative training costs. Additionally, because our candidates begin with significant relevant experience, the program actually costs 23% less per pilot than traditional training pipelines, while producing officers with unique and valuable skill sets. The senator's eyebrows rose slightly at the cost figures, her interest clearly piqued. But the most compelling evidence isn't in these charts, Rebecca continued, gesturing to the 5 SART graduates seated along the wall. It's in the real world. Performance of our pilots. Lieutenant Commander Chen, would you share your experience from Operation Northern Shield? Former First Officer Chen, now a lieutenant commander, stood and addressed the room. Her testimony about successfully evacuating civilians from a deteriorating security situation in the Arctic, utilizing skills developed through her SART training, visibly impressed the congressional delegation. As the briefing continued, Rebecca presented case after case demonstrating SART's value not just in cost savings or performance metrics, but in tangible operational advantages. By the time she concluded, even Senator Harris was nodding thoughtfully. "The data is compelling, Captain," the senator admitted during the Q&A session. "But I'm curious about your personal assessment. Having experienced both traditional aviation roles and this accelerated pathway, what do you see as the future of programs like SART?" Rebecca considered the question carefully. "Senator, I believe SART represents more than just an alternative training program. It embodies a philosophical shift in how we identify and develop talent, recognizing that expertise and aptitude don't always follow predictable paths." She gestured to the diverse group of SART graduates. These officers didn't become excellent pilots despite their unconventional backgrounds. They excelled because of them. Their unique perspectives and experiences inform their decision-making and problem-solving in ways that traditional training alone cannot provide. Rebecca paused, then continued with conviction. "I believe the future of military aviation, indeed, of our entire force, lies in recognizing and cultivating talent wherever it exists, not just where we expect to find it. SART isn't just training pilots. It's challenging our assumptions about capability and potential." The room fell silent as her words resonated. Even General Wallace seemed struck by the clarity and vision of her statement. After the briefing concluded and the delegation departed, Wallace approached Rebecca with an approving nod. "Excellently handled, Captain. Particularly, Senator Harris. I think you've converted our most significant skeptic." "Thank you, sir," Rebecca replied. "The program's results make a compelling case on their own." "True, but your presentation of those results was masterful." He gestured toward his office. "Walk with me. There's something we need to discuss." As they moved through the corridors of the headquarters building, Rebecca noticed a shift in the general's demeanor, a thoughtful consideration that suggested significant news. In his office, Wallace closed the door and turned to face her. The Secretary of the Air Force was quite impressed with today's briefing. So impressed, in fact, that he's recommended SART for significant expansion. Rebecca felt a surge of satisfaction. "That's excellent news, sir. There's more," Wallace continued. "The expansion would include establishing SART centers at 3 additional bases with a corresponding increase in training capacity and personnel." He moved to his desk, retrieving a folder that he handed to Rebecca. "And he wants you to oversee this expansion as Lieutenant Colonel Torres." Rebecca stared at the folder, momentarily speechless. A promotion to lieutenant colonel after just 2.5 years as an officer was unprecedented. leap that typically required years of progressive service and command experience. "Sir, she began, struggling to find appropriate words. "This is unexpected, is it?" Wallace asked with a knowing smile. "Your performance as SART's Director of Training has been exemplary. The program's success is largely due to your vision and leadership. The promotion is well-deserved and necessary for the position you'll be assuming." Rebecca opened the folder, scanning the details of her new assignment. "Commander, Special Aviation Response Team Program, responsible for all aspects of candidate selection, training, deployment, and ongoing professional development." The scope was far broader than her current role, encompassing strategic planning and policy development as well as operational oversight. "This represents a significant evolution for SART," Wallace explained. "Moving from a specialized training initiative to a comprehensive talent identification and development program with service-wide impact. Your background makes you uniquely qualified to lead this transition." As Rebecca absorbed the implications of this new direction, Wallace added one more significant detail. "The Secretary also believes SART's approach has applications beyond aviation. He's requested that you participate in a joint service working group exploring similar pathways for talent development in other specialized areas." The magnitude of the opportunity and responsibility was momentarily overwhelming. Rebecca closed the folder, gathering her thoughts before responding. "I'm deeply honored by the confidence the Secretary and you have placed in me, sir," she said finally. "And I believe wholeheartedly in SART's mission. If you truly believe I'm the right person to lead this expansion, I accept the challenge." Wallace's expression softened slightly. "I don't just believe it, Rebecca. I know it. You embody the very principle that drives this program, that capability and leadership can emerge from unexpected sources when given the right opportunity." The promotion ceremony took place 2 weeks later in the hangar that housed SART's training aircraft. The setting was symbolic, a space that represented the bridge between Rebecca's past and future, surrounded by the tools of transformation. General Wallace presided over the ceremony, which was attended by SART instructors, graduates, and candidates, along with representatives from throughout the Air Force aviation community. Most meaningful to Rebecca was the presence of her family, her sister Elena, her parents, and her nephew Marco, whose wide-eyed admiration was apparent as he watched his aunt receive her lieutenant colonel insignia. After the formal ceremony, during the reception that followed, Rebecca found herself approached by a young airman, woman in her mid-20s with the confident bearing of someone who had found her purpose. "Lieutenant Colonel Torres," the airman said. "I wanted to introduce myself. I'm Airman First Class Diaz. I've applied for the next SART assessment cycle." Rebecca smiled warmly. "It's good to meet you, Airman Diaz. What's your current role?" "I'm a meteorological technician." MAAM. "I've been serving for 3 years. From weather forecasting to flying," Rebecca observed. "That's quite a transition." Diaz nodded, her expression earnest. "It seemed impossible until I heard about you and SART. I've always been fascinated by aviation, but I never thought I could become a pilot. I didn't have the background, the connections, the pedigree, I guess." Her words struck a chord with Rebecca, who recognized the same self-limiting beliefs she had once held. The technical aspects of meteorology actually provide an excellent foundation for understanding flight dynamics, Rebecca noted. "Your experience predicting and analyzing weather patterns gives you insights that many pilot candidates lack." Diaz's eyes widened slightly at this reframing of her background. "I hadn't thought of it that way, ma'am. That's precisely what SART is about, recognizing the value in diverse experiences and perspectives." Rebecca studied the young airman thoughtfully. "The assessment is challenging, designed to identify specific aptitudes, but don't let that intimidate you. Approach it with confidence in your unique capabilities." As Diaz thanked her and moved away, Rebecca was approached by her sister Elena, who had been observing the exchange. Still mentoring, even at your own promotion party, Elena teased gently. Rebecca smiled. It's not just mentoring. Every SART candidate represents the program's future and our opportunity to continue challenging assumptions about who can lead and excel. Elena linked her arm through her sister's, guiding her toward a quieter corner of the hangar. You know, when you called me from Iceland 2.5 years ago, I never imagined this is where you'd end up. Lieutenant Colonel Torres, pioneering a revolutionary training program, changing Air Force policy. I couldn't have imagined it either, Rebecca admitted. Even after I accepted the commission and began training, I thought I'd simply become a pilot, an unusual one with an unconventional background, but still just flying aircraft and following orders. Instead, you're transforming the entire system, Elena observed with evident pride, creating opportunities for others to discover capabilities they never knew they had. Rebecca's gaze traveled across the hangar, taking in the diverse gathering pilots. From traditional and non-traditional backgrounds, aviation specialists, leadership from throughout the service, all united by a shared commitment to excellence and innovation. The transformation is just beginning, she said softly. What we're doing with SART isn't just about creating more pilots, or even about finding talent in unexpected places. It's about challenging the very notion of what's possible for individuals and for the institution itself. The following morning, her promotion celebration still fresh in her mind, Rebecca arrived at her office to find an unexpected visitor waiting. Captain Michael Donovan, one of the first pilots she had trained in the SART program. Now stationed at Travis Air Force Base in California, Donovan wasn't scheduled to be on the East Coast. Captain Donovan, she greeted him with surprise. What brings you to Andrews? His expression was serious, his posture tense. Ma'am, I need to brief you on a situation that developed yesterday. It involves one of our SART graduates and, well, it has significant implications for the program. Rebecca ushered him into her office, concern growing as Donovan explained the circumstances. Captain Sophia Reyes, the same instructor who had guided Rebecca through her own training and now commanded a C-17 squadron at Travis, had faced a complex emergency situation during a humanitarian mission to Indonesia. Catastrophic hydraulic failure combined with electrical system degradation, Donovan explained. In a remote area with minimal ground support and a full load of medical supplies and personnel. Rebecca felt a chill. Such a combination of failures was among the most challenging scenarios pilots could face. Was she able to land safely? Yes, ma'am, but that's not why I'm here. Donovan's expression shifted to one of quiet amazement. It's how she landed. Captain Reyes implemented an approach procedure that wasn't in any manual, a hybrid technique that drew on concepts from her experience as an air traffic controller before joining SART. He activated a tablet showing Rebecca the flight data and communications log from the incident. She essentially created a new emergency procedure on the spot, one that accounted for the specific failure mode and environmental conditions. Our analysis indicates that a standard approach would likely have resulted in a catastrophic outcome. Rebecca studied the data with growing interest. Has this been shared with Air Mobility Command? That's the other reason I'm here, Donovan replied. AMC has requested that you personally lead a review team to evaluate Captain Reyes's approach and determine whether it should be incorporated into standard emergency procedures. This was significant, not just for Reyes or SART, but potentially for all military aviation. The development of new emergency procedures typically involved extensive testing and simulation before implementation. For MC to consider adopting a technique developed during an actual emergency was unprecedented. There's something else, Donovan added, his voice quieter now. Something Captain Reyes said in her incident report that I thought you should hear. Directly. He pulled up the text and highlighted a section. The ability to synthesize my air traffic control background with pilot training. To see the emergency from both perspectives simultaneously was crucial to developing this approach. My SART training, with its emphasis on leveraging diverse experience rather than discarding it, directly contributed to our successful outcome. In the most critical moment, I didn't think like a pilot or an air traffic controller, I thought. Like both, Rebecca read the passage twice, recognizing its profound implications. This wasn't just validation of SART's training philosophy, it was evidence of its life-saving potential in real-world operations. "I'll need to see the complete data," she said, her mind already analyzing the situation. "And speak with Captain Reyes directly. When can she brief me?" "She's on a secure video link in the conference room right now, ma'am. Waiting for you." Rebecca spent the next 2 hours in detailed discussion with Reyes, examining every aspect of the emergency and the innovative response she had developed. By the end of the briefing, Rebecca was not only convinced of the approach's validity, but recognized its broader significance for the SART program. After concluding the call, she immediately contacted General Wallace, requesting an urgent meeting. His response was immediate. He would clear his schedule for a briefing that afternoon. In the intervening hours, Rebecca worked with her staff to prepare a comprehensive presentation on the incident, its implications, and her recommended response. When she entered Wallace's office at 1500 hours, she was fully prepared to advocate for a bold next step in SART's evolution. "This incident confirms what we've theorized but couldn't prove until now," she explained as Wallace reviewed the data. SART pilots don't just perform as well as traditionally trained aviators in certain crisis scenarios. Their diverse backgrounds can provide critical advantages. Wallace nodded thoughtfully. Captain Reyes essentially created a new emergency procedure drawing on her air traffic control experience? "Yes, sir. And preliminary simulation testing indicates her approach would be effective across a range of similar failure scenarios." Rebecca leaned forward, her conviction evident. "This validates our entire methodology, the integration of prior experience rather than its replacement." Wallace set aside the tablet, considering the implications. "You have recommendations, I assume?" "3, sir," Rebecca replied promptly. "First, establish a formal process for capturing and evaluating innovative techniques developed by SART pilots in operational environments. Second, expand our curriculum to more explicitly encourage this kind of integrated thinking. And third," she paused, knowing the significance of her next proposal, "create a specialized SART unit specifically tasked with developing new approaches to complex aviation challenges." The general's eyebrows rose slightly. "An R&D unit comprised of pilots with diverse professional backgrounds?" "Exactly, sir. Not just responding to emergencies, but proactively developing new procedures and techniques that draw on their unique perspectives." Rebecca's eyes shone with conviction. "The possibilities are extraordinary. Maintenance specialists bringing their mechanical insights, intelligence officers applying analytical methodologies, medical personnel incorporating human factors considerations." Wallace studied her thoughtfully. This would represent a significant expansion of SART's mission from training unconventional pilots to actively reshaping aviation procedures and protocols. "It's the logical next step, sir. We've proven that diverse backgrounds enhance pilot performance. Now we have evidence that this diversity can generate innovative solutions to complex problems. We should leverage that capability systematically." After a moment's consideration, Wallace nodded decisively. "Develop a detailed proposal for this R&D unit. I want to present it to the Secretary within the week." His expression softened slightly. "You continue to expand our vision of what's possible, Lieutenant Colonel. First as a flight attendant who became a pilot, and now as a leader transforming how we approach aviation innovation." 2 days later, as Rebecca worked late finalizing the proposal, she received an unexpected message from Airman Diaz. the meteorological technician she had met at her promotion ceremony. "Ma'am, I've completed the initial SART assessment. The evaluators have recommended me for full candidate evaluation. Thank you for your encouragement and for creating this pathway. Weather patterns and flight dynamics aren't so different after all. Both require understanding complex dynamic systems in three-dimensional space." I never saw that connection until our conversation. Reading the message, Rebecca felt a profound sense of satisfaction. This was the true measure of SART's impact, not just in emergency landings or innovative procedures, but in the transformation of individuals who discovered capabilities they had always possessed but never recognized. She glanced at the wall of her office where a framed photograph hung the cockpit of that C-17 over the North Atlantic, taken during her emergency landing. It served as a daily reminder of where her journey had begun and the unexpected path it had followed. From flight attendant to emergency pilot to training officer to program director to innovation leader, each transition building on the last, each role informed by all that had come before. The journey wasn't linear or predictable, but it was undeniably powerful in its impact, both for Rebecca herself and for the institution she served. As she returned to her work on the R&D unit proposal, Rebecca reflected on the message that would guide this next phase of SART's evolution and her own continuing journey of transformation. True innovation comes not from discarding diverse experiences, but from integrating them, finding the unexpected connections, the unique perspectives, the novel approaches that emerge only when we bring our whole selves to the challenges we face. Her journey from serving coffee to commanding aircraft, from responding to crisis to creating opportunity, embodied this truth. And in the pilot's SART was developing officers like Captain Reynolds, whose integrated perspectives were quite literally saving lives. Rebecca saw the future of aviation leadership. It was a future built not on rigid pathways or narrow definitions of capability, but on the recognition that extraordinary potential exists in unexpected places, if only we have the wisdom to see it and the courage to develop it. As Lieutenant Colonel Rebecca Torres, once just a flight attendant on a military transport, put the finishing touches on her proposal for aviation's future, she knew with absolute certainty that the most extraordinary journeys often begin with a single step into the unknown and the determination to keep walking forward, no matter how impossible the path might seem. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.